Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Tales of Old Tombstone. And we got bushwhacked. Yes, last week we promised you that the program right now would be a program on the Missouri bushwhackers. Well, unfortunately, that program got bushwhacked, and it will be coming to you next week. So we're going back to Tombstone, Tales of Old Tombstone with Stuart Rosebrook and Bob Boze, and brought to you by the Tombstone Monument Ranch. That show begins right now, and we're on.
To the town of our Priya rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome to this week's Tales of Old Tombstone. I'm here with Bob Boze, one of the great historians of Tombstone, Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp, the Cowboys, and all of the Earps. We are talking today with Brad Courtney, who is one of the preeminent historians of Prescott, Arizona. And Brad, welcome to the show. And Bob, have you and Brad met a number of times and talked about Tombstone and Prescott?
Well, we haven't met enough times, but I'll tell you, every time we do meet, it's a deep rabbit hole we go down. It's a thrill to be talking to him because Brad has uncovered some fantastic new information about Doc and the Earps in Prescott. Let's get to it.
I'm ready. Brad, welcome to the show. Are you up in your mountain home here in Prescott today?
Yeah, I'm speaking to you from the Prescott National Forest with I don't see any bears looking in or mountain lions, but we do have that here. So, yeah, glad to be talking to you from our forest home here where Wendy and I live.
Well, Brad, in the last few years, you have decided to crack open some somewhat legendary stories and try to bring the truth to the history of the famous Palace Saloon of Prescott, as well as the history of Whiskey Row. Tell us a little bit about your background coming to Prescott and why you decided that the truth needed to be told about the Palace and Whiskey Row.
I appreciate that because it's been quite a journey. Let me go back to how I got to Arizona. I'm from Michigan. I grew up on a farm, and I was trying to make it as a singer-songwriter, and that was going okay, but a job came up on the Navajo Indian Reservation at Tuba City. I came out here and I thought I would be, try it out for a year just for the experience, but I fell in love with it. Ended up doing river trips down to Colorado. Of course, that kept me here for quite a while. Then I taught in Phoenix. But I got my master's degree in history while I was in Phoenix, and I'd written my master's thesis on the Geronimo campaign, the last 5 months of it. And I was working on that, but my wife, Holly, and I started coming up to Prescott, and I just fell totally in love with it. And where do you go when you visit Prescott? You go to the plaza. You go to, of course, Whiskey Row, and there's great places like the Palace and Hotel St. Michael. And I just fell in love with it. And when I was on the row, what are the stories you hear? You hear about Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. And so at some point I learned I was able to retire, and I bought a cabin up here in just about a half mile away from where I am now. And I was able to retire, and I moved here, and then I discovered I went out to get all the books about Prescott, the history, and there's some, and some good ones, but I really wanted to learn about the history of Whiskey Row because from what I was hearing, it was the Earps, it was Doc Holliday, it was, Kate and all that kind of stuff. So I decided, but I learned there was no books just on the history of Whiskey Row, no definitive study, no really academic look at it. So that's when I started doing that. And what I found is not what I really expected, but actually something better.
And in uncovering, go ahead. In uncovering that research, you found yourself going back and forth between Tombstone and Prescott, trying to understand how the Doc Holliday, the Earps, and Big Nose Kate made that connection. And that's one of the things we want to focus on today. But tell us a little bit about a couple of things you uncovered that really unmask some of the myths of Whiskey Row.
Well, I won't go into some of the myths. Well, do you remember the story about how the capital was sent to Tucson with the story about the representative from I think it was Maricopa County, and he had one eye, or he had a glass eye.
Oh yeah,
that was such a fantastic story, and of course I ended up not being true. But as far as the Tombstone story goes, I won't get back because I know you want to ask me about it later. What I learned about Wyatt Earp, because he's the most famous. He was really only here for maybe a week or two. So he was just passing through. So all these legends formed just from that little time. Everybody wants a piece of Wyatt Earp. And he's been said to have sat in this saloon. There's even a story where he shot a couple guys. And, people not realizing that Wyatt Earp's life has been looked at more closely than most presidents. So these legends came up. There was 2 hotels that said he slept there. And so that kind of thing. Well, as far as the palace goes, no one had really looked at that either. And a false date was given, and I can understand why, because the palace is actually a merger between 2 saloons. The Cabinet Saloon, which was founded in 1874, and the palace connected to the palace today is actually there were 2 other palaces before that, and there was an 1877 palace, and that's the date we often hear about. But it actually has a connection with Virgil Earp, which I'll get into. But that's one of the things that the palace's origins actually go back to 1874, and there's a new sign going up, a historical marker going up on the palace that's going to say that. So that's one of the things. A lot of misinformation about the palace, which is such a fantastic place.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Wyatt Earp arriving now. The old story goes that Wyatt Earp was getting bored in Dodge. It lost its snap, I believe is how he put it. And so he goes through Las Vegas, New Mexico, and picks up Doc Holliday, who had a saloon and a shooting scrape there. And they come across over to Flagstaff, down across Mingus Mountain, if I remember correctly. And I believe Virgil and Allie had been living out over by Camp Verde, maybe it is. And she was a what do you call a birth mother or whatever. And then they come over and he starts working at a sawmill, and then the Earps show up. Is any of that true?
Yeah, actually, you're spot on, and you brought up some things that recently discovered. And what I think is, of course, like you said, Doc had some problems, like he often did in Las Vegas, and he was ready to get out. And I'm even getting that when Wyatt decided to move to started head toward Las Vegas, I don't know if there was any communication going on. That's one of the things I'm looking at. Did Wyatt or did Doc know that Wyatt was on his way? Because according to Gary Roberts, it's very possible that Doc left Las Vegas, and while Wyatt was heading to Las Vegas, they kind of crisscrossed and eventually met up and then headed to Las Vegas. And you brought up the route here. Stuart's and my good friend, the constable, who holds the same office as Virgil did when Virgil was here, Ron Williams, has done some research about the route that Virgil took to get here. And I'm of the opinion that Wyatt took the same route that Virgil would have, because Virgil probably would have given him those instructions. Yeah, and it came down through Winslow, I think they call it the Chavez Trail, through Winslow and in front of the San Francisco Peaks. You know, you don't really go into the San Francisco Peaks. So down through Camp Verde, and that's where we're starting to think that Virgil in Chaput's book, am I saying that right? Don Chaput?
Don Chaput. Uh-huh.
And, yeah, I never knew how to say his name, but a fantastic historian. He had that Virgil was doing mail deliveries from Miller Valley. Well, if you're familiar with Prescott, Miller Valley's just you can walk to it, you know, and it's just really close. But according to some of the other information, it was 2 days away. So we think that he actually lived in the Camp Verde area first, and then moved to Prescott. And this is what a lot of people don't know. Newton Earp, the half brother, was here first. He's the one that found the sawmill, and we're
really that fills in a gap there, because in the Earp Brothers of Tombstone, the Frank Waters book, where he allegedly interviewed Allie, who was his housekeeper, and she carried a flask, and he started talking to her and allegedly got Allie Earp's version. A lot of people dismissed that version because they say that Frank Waters didn't like the Earps and he was trying to blame them. But I find many things in that book just fascinating. For example, that Allie Earp was a birth mother. What do you call it? You know, what do you call a person who helps with the birth? And they're in Camp Verde.
A midwife. She was a midwife.
That is. And what I love about this story is that the woman gave birth, and her husband was angry because she didn't get him coffee in the afternoon, and they just steamed Allie. And it's those kind of stories that just make it real to me. I just so fantastic. So now they go over the mountain. They end up in Prescott at a sawmill that his brother has. So take us from there.
Let me jump in here real quick, because a few years ago we did some research following T.C. Teppertiller and Gary Roberts' research, as well as some notes by Allie from her diary. And from those two historians, they talk about Wyatt and James and his wife, adopted children, arriving in Las Vegas. Wyatt has a buckboard. He thinks he's going to turn into a stagecoach. His ultimate destination is Tombstone. They pick up Doc and Kate, and they follow the Santa Fe Trail out of Las Vegas, work their way down to Zuni, which Allie says they camped overnight, which means they hooked up with the Beale Wagon Trail across northern Arizona to that crossing, Sunset Crossing at Winslow, down across the Mogollon Rim to Camp Verde, maybe even on the Stoneman, it's a little bit of the Stoneman Trail there, and then up through Copper Canyon, up following the Crook Trail into Prescott. Kind of paint a picture that that's the route that had already been established between Prescott and Santa Fe, connecting the two territorial capitals.
Right, that makes sense, you know, coming across that way. But back to Virgil getting here. Yeah, we think he stayed in Camp Verde and did, you know, and also discovered there was a saloon called the Jackson and Tompkins on Montezuma Street, which is Whiskey Row, and that's just south of where the palace is now. There's a place called Arts Prescott Gallery there that's now. So it's a few doors down from the palace. And that's where the mail was dropped off and picked up there. And this Jackson fellow was connected to that. But, Newton was here, and Ron, the constable, went in and he was looking for a deed, you know, with the sawmill and everything. So we think that Newton actually was squatting, and Virgil was squatting. And my conclusion that this sawmill was abandoned, and he got it going again. And he was putting out, wasn't a major source of lumber for Prescott anything. And everybody in Prescott wants to say, yeah, our place has Virgil Earps wood, but he kind of did that on the side, really, especially when he picked up some lawman jobs. The story is, according to Allie, and wouldn't you love to have her diary in hand? When I read the Frank Waters book, I hear Granny. He does that voice. So the whole time I see Granny Clappett giving the story. But the story she gives is that Newton Earps' wife, and I think her name was Jenny, she was very religious, and she was a staunch Methodist. And here's a little Prescott history, because Prescott kind of made fun of Tombstone when it was coming alive. And so you don't even have a church down there. Prescott didn't have a church building. It was founded in 1864. Prescott did not have a church building until 1875. So they had nothing to brag about. They would meet on the plaza, the churches would. And it's according to Drew Desmond that this building hosted like several denominations, but it was a Methodist church. But the story is that Newton's wife did not have enough church life here in Prescott, so they took off, and then Virgin Alley stayed there. And then another history takes off after that. But yeah, I'm starting to think that the whole time Virgil was here, they were out by Thumb Butte at that sawmill. And I think this would be a great Bob Bozebell piece of art, is Wyatt and Virgil meeting underneath Thumb Butte, and you would Doc on the side. And but I think he stayed there until they left for Tombstone in November 1879.
So let me ask you this. If you could recreate it, as they're coming in, they have to pass through Fort Whipple, they come into town, they're coming down Gurley. Do you think they would have met Virgil in town, or just kept going through town and then up to where the sawmill was? And where do you think Virgil and Newton and everyone was living? Because we know they were only there for a couple of weeks before they left. Where do you think they hung out? Because this is part of the whole rumor mill that they were all down on, Whiskey Row, gambling, hooting and hollering and gambling it up. But where do you think they stayed before the Earps left Doc and Kate behind?
Right. Until I know for sure, I think it was Don Chaput's book that said that Virgil had picked up a place in Prescott, but I just don't see it. So until I learned something different, I really believe that they went directly to Virgil's place, the sawmill, Thumb Butte, and then Doc and Kate came in, and there weren't a lot of hotels, really good hotels at that time. So it's a guess where Doc and Kate stayed, and we get into later where he ends up staying. But after Kate left, and I believe that the best bet is that the whole Earp group stayed out there at the sawmill and left from there. And yeah, as far as the hooting, all these. It would be silly to think that they did not come to Whiskey Row, but we don't have any, Wyatt was not really that well known when he came into Prescott, so he didn't show up in the papers, which is, when I went through every single newspaper from 1864 to 1902, and Wyatt Earp's name didn't show up until the Tombstone OK Corral fight, and then Virgil, of course, popped up, but Virgil came up a lot. But we really don't know where. I can make some guesses where they would have patronized on Whiskey Row. Doc, of course, we can make some even bolder guesses, but I just see Wyatt as it was kind of a layover, and they headed out. So my shortest chapter in my book coming up, the Prescott Tombstone Connection, is going to be on Wyatt. He was here. Teffertiller, if you look at his book, he just kind of mentions he was in Prescott and then he was gone. There's not much to say about Wyatt being in Prescott.
So why don't we take a quick break right there, and on our next segment, we will talk more about the departure of the Earps and Doc Holliday in Prescott, Arizona Territory.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Bob. My goodness, we are really having the story time today, aren't we? And I imagine part 2 is going to take us back to Tombstone and perhaps to that OK Corral. Let's see what we're going to learn about that. This is a part of a new adventure, Tales of Old Tombstone, and we trust that you'll enjoy it and recommend us to others. And this is brought to you by the Cowboy Spirit USA Radio Network. And we cooperate and have good friends and good sponsors, so we want to encourage you to come to Tombstone and experience all that is there. And in particular, let's ask you this question. Have you ever dreamed of going to Tombstone, Arizona, and then riding the range and learning to herd and drive cattle on a real working ranch? Now, wouldn't that be a unique adventure? Well, the true ranch cowboys and cowgirls right here in Tombstone at Tombstone Monument Guest Ranch, which is a part of the True Ranch Collection, are waiting to welcome you to a real premier Western dude ranch experience just outside Tombstone, right here, the town too tough to die. So let me encourage you right now, okay, while you're thinking about it and saying, maybe we should do something different this year, okay? Go to tombstonemonumentranch.com. Once again, that's Tombstone Monument Ranch, put it all together, .com. Or why don't you talk to them in person? They'd be glad to do that, and they'll tell you more stories of Tombstone and the opportunities available for a unique experience. 520-457-7299. Okay, once again, here we go. Carefully now, 520-457-7299. And now, we're going to hear the rest of the story.
Well, we're back with historian Brad Courtney today from Prescott, Arizona, on Tales of Old Tombstone. And Brad, we were just talking about the Earps and Doc Holliday and Kate Elder in Prescott, and the fact that the Earps had a very short stay there in November of 1879. Is that correct? And you've been doing a lot of research on Doc Holliday. Why don't you jump in there and tell us a little bit about, set the stage for the arrival and departure of the Earps, and then Doc and Kate in Prescott.
Right, yeah, and Doc and Kate and the two of them together are just fascinating. They're both a mystery, so it's a real challenge getting to know them, for lack of a better way of putting it. But yeah, Doc and Kate. And of course, you probably know that Kate was against going to Tombstone, and she did not like Wyatt Earp. She thought Wyatt had some kind of spell over Doc, which I kind of disagree with. I think Doc was his own man, but I think they had a real bond. But yeah, so Doc and Kate were having arguments about whether or not to go to Tombstone, and where they were staying. There were two separate tenures when Doc was here. So they got here in November, and they left for Globe. Well, I'll get back to that part there. But they were arguing about going to Tombstone. Kate didn't want to go to Tombstone, and I don't think Doc was that gung-ho about it. But according to Kate, Wyatt was sending letters to Wyatt was sending letters to Doc saying that there's opening for dentists here. And I did some research about that. And here's the funny thing. There were, according to my research, there were 5 dentists already in Tombstone in 1880. And did some more research, and there was only one dentist in Prescott, which is surprising at the time. So Doc would have been doing better here in Prescott as a dentist. He would have had more customers. There may have been some more, but there was only one I could find. So it's not like they started to head to Tombstone or something like that, but Kate ends up going to Globe, and according to Kate, she thought Doc was going to go to Tombstone. But either he changed his mind, and this is why I don't think Doc won $40,000 in Prescott, like Stuart Lake said, or even $10,000. But I think Doc made some good money gambling on Whiskey Row, because he went back to Las Vegas, and the saloon he had in Las Vegas, he owed some money on, and there was actually a suit against him. But he actually showed some integrity, went back and paid that off, comes back to Prescott, and that's when he settled in with Richard Elliott and John Gosper. And do we want to talk about that yet?
Yeah, who are these guys he comes to live with? We're talking about a notorious gambler dentist, and he's traveling back and forth. I mean, there's no train. There's no. I mean, this guy's got tuberculosis. He's a pretty tough cat. How's he going back and forth? And then he comes back, and he's living with some highfalutin, folks.
And a temperance leader, Richard Elliott, which is, beyond funny. With we know about Doc's drinking habits. Kate said he didn't drink that much, but she also said he always had a glass of whiskey at hand, and then she kind of contradicted herself, saying, but he didn't drink that much, but he always had a glass of whiskey there. But yeah, he comes back to Prescott. He's back by so he shows up in this Yavapai County census as J.H. Holliday, and he was listed as a dentist. So he must have got back here in Prescott in May sometime. So he wasn't gone very long. And exactly when they left, I'll probably be able to find that, because they actually went up to Gillette, where the Tip Top Mine was, and
down the old Black Canyon Highway on the Black Canyon stage.
Up there. So he either turned around and came back to Prescott and then to Las Vegas, but he ends up back in Prescott in time for the June census. He showed up, so I think he was here in May. He's living with the guy, and this has been very exciting for me, because we actually found out where this guy, Richard Elliott's house was, on Montezuma Street. And it was just behind the row of buildings facing the plaza on Gurley Street. So within walking distance of the bars there on Gurley Street, which was probably considered part of Whiskey Row at the time. So Doc could just walk right there and gamble and drink and do whatever he wanted. But he was living with a guy named Richard Elliott, who was a man who wore many hats. But he actually lived in this house. So he did advertise it as a boarding house, but Richard Elliott lived there as well. He was a miner. He actually had a mat making business and some other businesses. He was a real entrepreneur. And also living with them at the time was the acting governor, John Gosper. And
that's just a mind blower that Doc Holliday, this ne'er-do-well dentist and gunfighter, would stoop so low as to room with the governor of Arizona. That's just so low.
Yeah, I wonder what John Gosper was saying. But here's the way I see it in my mind. Doc Holliday was a gentleman, and he was a professional. So, I don't think he came to Prescott and people were going, oh, the murderer, the killer, the gunslinger, the gambler. I don't think his reputation, as far as I can say, I don't think his reputation followed him into Prescott, because, you just didn't have that kind of information. So I think he could, being a Southern gentleman, brought up in those ways, he could pass himself off with great manners. And that's the way people described him. He had great manners. He was a real gentleman. So I think they kind of vetted him, and they saw this guy behaving himself pretty much. And he was right there. They said some other well-to-do folks were living nearby. But anyway, we pinpointed where that is, and we're actually in the process of putting a historical marker there. I've got about a third of the funds raised for this marker and hope to have it in place by August 14th. and hope to have you both there at our unveiling event. So there's my little promo there. But back to Richard Elliott. Yeah, what's funny about that too is he was the temperance leader, and I guess quite a singer as well. And he lived
Doc
there.
Holliday's living right off of Whiskey Row with a temperance leader and the acting governor of the Arizona Territory.
Yeah, and you know,
couldn't write that in a script.
Yeah, I know.
Nobody would believe it.
And most people know that, you know, John Gosper was acting governor because John Fremont was such an absentee governor. He was running the state. And when the whole Tombstone spectacle happened, the drama there, it was John Gosper who was really involved with that, trying to do something about that. And I've looked, and I don't see Doc getting any favors from John Gosper at all, you know. He wasn't playing any favorites. So it's conjecture. Did they get along? He must have, because I think he lived there for like 4 months. And, of course, Gosper was busy. But I think Doc was just gambling the whole time. There was a saloon, I'd say within 100 yards, called the Sazerac. And there's some evidence that actually showed up in the Arizona Republican, that Doc went in there and caused a scene one time, but there's some things I got to work out there. But there was a saloon called the Sazerac. But practically, he lived at the back door of that. And then the saloon that became the Palace, it was called the Cabinet Saloon. And that was really the gambling center of the Arizona, of Prescott anyway. And the Cabinet Saloon became the Palace Saloon. So when the Palace says that Doc gambled in their saloon, it's kind of true, but we really don't know. But the Cabinet Saloon did become the Palace Saloon there, so I'm sure there's some connection there.
Well, Brad, we're gonna take a break here in just a moment. We're gonna come back and talk about Virgil Earp in Prescott, but I have one question for you. When you're doing your research on Doc Holliday, when do you think the name Doc became used more than his real full name? And tell us a little bit about that, because that is something you have to track as a researcher, right?
You know, I'm not real sure. I've actually was asked that question, I think by Jeff Smith, Soapy Smith's great-grandson. And he was asking, was that common? And as far as I could see, when he showed up in the newspapers, I'm thinking maybe Las Vegas, you know, when he started showing up. But more often than not, his name was listed as Doc Holliday. And by the time he got to Tombstone, that's pretty much all you saw was Doc Holliday. You know, so I haven't really been able to pinpoint when, but I'm guessing it's probably Dodge City time.
Bob, have you come across that at all in your research on Doc Holliday?
No, it's hard, and it's like particles grow on the legend, and it's hard to scrape it off, and you can't. So then it becomes twice as hard to figure out where it started. And I agree with Brad. It's kind of dead listener.
You know, it's actually, as you were talking, Bob, Gary Roberts listed when a bunch of the Dodge City folks were showing up in Las Vegas, he listed a bunch of people, and one was a Doc, and he gave kind of the newspaper, the Ford County something or other newspaper, listed a Doc somebody, and Gary Roberts thinks it was Doc Holliday. So I'm thinking by Las Vegas, that was pretty much the common name for him. That's just a wild conjecture there. But he was listed as a Doc in the Las Vegas newspapers, at least according to what Gary Roberts thinks. And he's the guy I go to as far as Doc goes.
Versus John Henry Holliday looking for his initials in the newspaper or in census reports. It's kind of like George Armstrong Custer. There are a lot of historians who prefer to refer to Doc as John Henry versus Doc. And as we all know, when we go fishing for research, you're going to try every possible, combination to see if you can vet that out. And speaking of vetting things out, we're going to come back from from this break, and Bob has some questions he's received from listeners on Virgil Earp, and we're going to put it to you, Brad. So hold on, folks. So we'll be right back.
Well, folks, welcome back. But we got bushwhacked again. The technology kind of hit us, and we missed the part with Brad and a further comment about the Earps and about the Prescott situation and your questions about the Earps and all of their adventures from Tombstone to Prescott. But we'll put that together next week. And by the way, if you would like to tell us more or ask some more questions, reach out to us at this address. Here we go. It's that's TWO. Spell it out. 2lane66kids@gmail.com. That's 2lane66kids@gmail.com. And tell us your story. Tell us more, and we'll be happy to include your questions on the next program about the bushwhackers and, of course, more about the adventures of the Earps. And thank you, all of you, for joining us for this week's episode of Tales of Old Tombstone. And again, thanks again to our sponsor, the Tombstone Monument Guest Ranch, right here in Tombstone. And we are grateful for their sponsorship. And make sure now that you are giving some serious thought for this adventure for you and your family. It's a place not only of a great experience, but you'll hear some more wonderful stories of Tales of Old Tombstone. So reach out to them today. Again, TombstoneMonumentRanch.com. That's TombstoneMonumentRanch.com. And when you get there, tell Michelle that you heard about it on Tales of Old Tombstone.
Big iron, when he tried to match the ranger with the big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.